We are first up joined by David Dennis Jr. He is senior culture editor for News One, and we have a lot to break down. Good evening, David. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I am so excited to talk to you. Let's get right into it because earlier in the show, Anna Kasparian broke down how dozens of Bahamas Hurricane Dorian survivors actually say they were kicked off a ferry headed to the U.S. because of a U.S. government policy. And I think we want to have a broader conversation about the U.S. is in the history of treatment when it comes to natural disaster victims. And we can talk about Katrina, we can talk about Maria, right? What's that in Puerto Rico? And obviously the earthquake in Haiti. Where do you stand on this?
Yeah, so I was born in Louisiana, raised in Jackson, Mississippi, and I remember Katrina vividly. And this is one of those instances where we look at Trump and we talk about the evil of Donald Trump and the things that he does. And of course, he went on to say that there were some bad people coming from the Bahamas and the usual racist rhetoric. We could say all that, and we could talk about this as being a Trump-specific thing, but it's not. This is, again, we've talked about this before, continuation of Republican policy that in my lifetime goes back to Katrina. I remember when they treated black folks in New Orleans the exact same way. They kept them cooped up in the Superdome. They villainized them. They treated them as if they were stealing goods just for trying to survive, and essentially kicked them out of the city, moved them across the country, treated them like criminals, and that's what we're seeing now. So we can talk about the evil of Trump, and there's a lot to that we can do and talk about the racism of Trump. But this is American policy. This is how we treat these natural disasters, especially in this day and age when a lot of these affect disproportionately people of color, and as global warming worsens, this will impact people of color more.
You're completely right. We have a lot to get to today, and unfortunately, so we're going to move on. But let's move on to Antonio Brown because he made a big decision over the weekend and bounced up. He ended up with the New England Patriots. A lot of people upset with him. There's a lot going on here because I want to talk about how this has been framed, because I actually saw some tweets on your timeline. You have a great Twitter timeline. Shout out, what's your Twitter real quick? What is it?
David D TSS. Everybody give me a follow.
Yes, give him a follow. And I saw at some point someone had tweeted something like, what about the children, or this is gonna be bad for kids to see. Someone called this the worst thing ever that in sports, period, something along those lines. And I wanna talk about the framing of it and also why you think it is that so many people do not like the idea of athletes having the same sort of control over where they work that most regular adults do.
Yeah, so the Antonio Brown thing has been quite a circus over the last few months. He joined the Oakland Raiders. He fought the NFL over helmets. He fought the Raiders over his peeling feet, which was a thing that happened. And he basically forced his way out and went with the Patriots, who there are rumors that that's who he wanted to be with all along. He left the Raiders with $0, joined the Patriots, and now they're a powerhouse. And again, what we see is a lot of times with these athletes taking control over their careers and doing things that a lot of times the owners do. I mean, on NFL, you can cut a player and not have to pay him anymore. So Antonio Brown took a very I'm not going to defend a lot of the stuff he did, but he took his career into his own hands, went to the Patriots, and that offends a lot of people, especially when you see the workers, a lot of times black folks, making decisions for themselves. So yeah, Greeny this morning went on and said this was the most unprofessional thing he's ever seen in sports. I remember Mike Tyson biting somebody's ear off in a sporting event. I remember Tanya Harding allegedly hiring somebody to break her opponent's leg with a crowbar. I remember the Malice in the Palace. I remember, literally every domestic violence incident in the NFL. I don't think that we could qualify this as the most unprofessional thing we've ever seen, but that tends to be what happens a lot of times when athletes sort of go against the grain and break some of these established rules.
Fantastic points there. We were chuckling behind the scenes. They were like, whoa, he's right. Yeah, I knew it wasn't the worst, but you brought up some just wild things. And how can you even fix your mouth to say that? All right, let's move on to Kamala Harris, because today, 2020 candidate and Senator Kamala Harris, she released a huge criminal justice reform plan. It's just some of the things there. She wants to end mass incarceration, undo the war on drugs, legalize marijuana, end the death penalty, and solitary confinement, get rid of cash bail, and much more. The plan, I think, kind of pushes back at critics who have a lot of negative things to say about her record as prosecutor and, of course, California's state attorney general. What are your thoughts on the plan? And do you think that she will be able to convince voters that she will approach the system differently as president, different than she did as a prosecutor?
To answer that, no. I think that no matter what policy she has, is an uphill battle. The brand has been on her. She's been, a lot of times with these, we learned from 2016 that the lowest common denominator is what people remember. People will call Elizabeth Warren Pocahontas or whatever this whole time. They'll call Biden somebody who messes up every time he speaks, and then of course they'll call Kamala Harris a cop.
Well, wait, and I want to stop you right there because you're right. Everyone says that's the common thing. Kamala Harris is a cop, but I've never heard that about Amy Klobuchar. I've never heard that about Eric Swalwell. They had the same jobs.
Yeah,
right? I mean, and that's interesting because why is no one saying Swalwell's a cop, but when he was still in the race? Why is no one saying Klobuchar is a cop? I know why. All right, so here we go, back to the first question.
Yeah, so there is some intellectual sort of dishonesty that goes on with a lot of these, and it's, like I said, lowest common denominator, and a lot of that is just that the base idea is that she's a cop, right? And so it is an uphill battle for her to go against that. Now, looking at the policy, she did talk to a lot of activists, and she seems to have put a lot of thought into this policy, and it really does go to show how much impact Black Lives Matter and activism has had in this country. These are conversations that we would have not had 5 years ago before Ferguson. These are conversations that were not happening in the White House. They were not happening in presidential debates. And now, Kamala Harris, who is somebody who also 5 years ago, people think may have not even come close to having this conversation, has a pretty comprehensive criminal justice reform. My problem is I just think it's going to be hard for her to sell herself as the criminal justice Black Lives Matter candidate, considering the label that she's already sort of established.
And is that label fair? Not just because it's not given to other people, but because of her record. I think that there are a lot of positives about who she was as a prosecutor. I think that her record, as far as the state rape kit DNA database, or rape kit backlog, excuse me. I think that was fantastic. I think she put a lot of work in there. I think, what else it's on the top of my, but as far as like revenge porn and what she did with tech companies and how she was able to get them to take this seriously and things like that. Why do you think there's not a lot of positive that jumps out?
Well, that's the label she has. And I think that especially if you're trying to reach out to Black voters, as soon as you start to have the label of somebody who is involved with mass incarceration, involved with putting Black folks in jail, involved with issues in terms of criminalizing, when talked about drug use and things like that. I mean, it's hard to break away from that. And you know as well as anybody else that when those memes start circulating on Twitter, when social media gets involved in it, and that stuff is part of the label. I mean, it's the emails 2020, same thing.
You're right. All right, let's talk about Bernie Sanders, because there's the latest controversy involving Bernie Sanders and the N-word. A right-wing website, to be fair, yes, did bring up a passage from Sanders' book, a 1997 book, Outsider in the House. And in the passage, he is explaining using racism to pit poor white people against Black people as a political tactic. And I want to show you what he wrote. He wrote, this is just part of it, obviously. For 100 years, the white workers of the South were the most exploited white workers in America. They were paid the lowest wages. They endured the worst working conditions, their housing. I want to fast forward a little bit here. It says, what did they have? They were given N-words to hate and look down on. N-words who couldn't vote, drink at their water fountains, use the same bathrooms, or sit up front in the buses or movie theaters. Sanders' campaign National Press Secretary Brianna Joy Gray defended this uncensored use of the N-word in a statement, saying, in part, Senator Sanders is describing the well-documented racism and hatred that was used to divide the working class against itself in this country for hundreds of years. In fact, that entire chapter of the book is simply a recounting and criticism of the Republican strategy that was infamously described by GOP strategist Lee Atwater in 1981, which involved using racial bigotry and epithets to demonize people of color. Many people seem to believe that it is okay for non-Black people to use the N-word if it's part of a direct quote, if they had good intentions, and a lot of people believe it's not okay. And I also want to point out that this was not a direct quote. You had a lot of thoughts about this on Twitter. I know that I saw you reacting to this. What's going on in your head?
Yeah, I mean, you just can't say the N-word. I mean, this is basic. This is basics, right? Like, there is no need, unless it was a direct quote. It wasn't a direct quote, first of all, like you said. Second of all, I mean, you could have just said Black folks. There was no point in using the N-word.
I would have understood, yeah.
Yeah, I would have known he was talking about it. Could have said Black folks, could have said African Americans. That's fine. But also, what we're talking about here is the, Bernie Sanders' whole ideology about race in America, which is why it doesn't connect for some Black folks. I mean, his idea is that economics determines racism, when in fact it's the opposite. Racism determines economics in this country. And, to go further in that quote, he says that, it was about fighting a common oppressor between poor whites and Black folks, and that's not true. You can say that the oppressor of poor whites is rich white folks, but the oppressor of Black folks is white people. And so there's no way that you can say that we have the same common oppressor, because poor white folks oppress Black people all the time. And to say that there's anything different or that there is a reason beyond pure racism is just not. It's just a mischaracterization of the way race works in America.
Yeah, would it have been the worst to say, look, you know what I meant? I'm not a bad guy, but you're right. I could have written that differently. Would that have been bad? I wonder why that wasn't. I wonder why that wasn't the response.
Yeah, just say you've learned. I mean, it was 20 years ago, right? So just say, you thought you were making a point and you messed up, and that's what it was. I mean, he messed up. He said something that he should not have said, and that's the point of it. I think that the bigger issue, or not the bigger issue, because saying the N-word's a pretty huge issue, but a huge issue is the fact that he just does not understand how race works in this country if he's going to equate, justify the racism of poor whites in this country.
David Dennis Jr., thank you so much for being here with us. Can't wait to have you back. Follow him on Twitter and check out his News One articles. You write for a lot of places. Follow him on Twitter and he posts his work there. All right, thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Like what you see? Click the subscribe button below and don't forget to ring the bell to never miss another video from the Young Turks.